This is BBC Two. Now Evan Davis, Kirsty Walk and Emily Maitlis with Newsnight.
It is a choice between me and Jeremy Corbyn. Britain simply will not get the right Brexit deal if we have the drift and division of a hung parliament.
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real.
If the Conservative Party has won the most seats, then it will be incumbent on us to ensure that we have that period of stability.
Theresa May has run probably the worst campaign that any of us have seen from a Prime Minister in modern British political history.
What have I become? My sweetest friend. Everyone I know goes away in the end.
Politics has changed, and politics isn't going back into the box where it was before.
The manifesto, which was drafted by her and about 2 other people, was a total disaster, must go down now as one of the worst manifestos in history.
I had wanted to achieve a larger majority, but that was not the result that we secured, and I'm sorry.
If I could start again, a million miles away, I would keep myself, I would find a way.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a government.
Hello, good evening, welcome to Westminster, which is not just the location I'm in this evening, it could be the name of a long-running real-life drama series with a somewhat unlikely plot. Well, we're here tonight to analyse the latest episode of the strange storyline in which Britain currently stars. So tonight we'll ask some big questions. Perhaps we'll even answer them. Can the government govern? How did we get here? What now for the Union, the UK one that is, and what now for Brexit? We'll hear from Kirsty in Edinburgh, in light of the Scottish results. We'll hear from Mark Urban in Brussels, and we'll join Emily in the studio for some political reflection too. But really, it does all come back to that result last night. What seemed like a very surprising election outcome was perhaps not so out of the blue when viewed as simply one more sign that many people in Britain have a thirst for change. There is an insurrection against the old ruling class. It has roots in the financial crash of a decade ago. It saw the elite overruled by the people on Brexit. And it seems that insurrection is not over. That doesn't explain all of it, but it gets you some of the way. Well, our political editor, Nick Watt, is with me. Nick, how long have you been reporting on this stuff?
A number of years, maybe a number of decades.
Right. And this must rank as one of the most extraordinary things you've seen.
Yes, I mean, I think the best way of describing the atmosphere in the cabinet is completely shell-shocked. In the final weeks of the campaign, there was a consensus that the Conservative campaign was deeply flawed. That's what ministers thought. But they did not see this result coming. And an interesting sign of that, they thought it was all OK because the postal votes looked all OK. But when they opened the ballot boxes, the real ballot boxes, it was a different story. But the big lesson to take from this is that Theresa May's Brexit strategy has really been turned on its head. She wanted to get that strong mandate to give her authority at home and authority in Brussels, and the danger for her now is that she's going to be moved from pillar to post. There will be the hardline Eurosceptics in Welsh and English seats, then you'll have Scottish Conservatives who will want, banned word, a soft Brexit.
Any 10 of them basically can
exactly.
do that,
And then the DUP, who are massively in favour of Brexit, when you actually look at their manifesto, the language is quite conciliatory about a customs arrangement with the EU, because obviously they want a frictionless border with
Where does this leave Theresa May? I mean, this is the question that everybody is asking today. Where does it leave her? How long has she got?
Well, I would say that Theresa May is weak and diminished, and in a sign of that, this evening she reappointed 5 of her most senior cabinet ministers to their posts. She had been planning quite a significant reshuffle. And it's interesting, I understand that some members of the cabinet have made clear in no uncertain terms to Downing Street that the Prime Minister must sack her two joint chiefs of staff, Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill. They are regarded as secretive and uncollegiate, and in the case of Nick Timothy, he was the author of the social care element of the manifesto that led to that U-turn and defined the final stage of the Conservative campaign. Now, as to the Prime Minister, opinions in the Cabinet are divided. I spoke to one member of the Cabinet who said if she wants to stay on, she should stay on. But other ministers, I understand, are saying she should think of going in the next few months because the Conservatives cannot afford another encounter between Theresa May and the electorate. And interestingly, they are all agreed on one thing. The Conservatives must do all they can to avoid another election because they fear if that happened, we would be seeing a Corbyn premiership.
Thanks, Nick. Well, Nick spent the day here in Westminster, where I should say, by the way, there's been enormous atmosphere of protesters, people passing by, onlookers and the press. Nick's been examining the shape of Theresa May's new government and asking, can she govern?
For now, Theresa May continues as Her Majesty's 13th Prime Minister, but she stumbled back into Downing Street after being run a close second by a man who for 3 decades has been dismissed by all parties as a marginal figure.
This government will guide the country through the crucial Brexit talks.
It was almost as if nothing had changed as Theresa May pledged to lead another government. Ministers told Newsnight that the Prime Minister's failure to acknowledge in her statement that she had squandered a Tory majority was a major mistake. Within a few hours, there was a new hint of contrition.
I'm sorry for all those candidates and hard-working party workers who weren't successful.
Tories are divided over Theresa May's future. Eurosceptics are determined to keep the author of Brexit Means Brexit. Others say she should go within a few months to allow for an orderly Tory leadership contest to avoid yet another circus. Normally on the Friday after a general election, College Green here in the shadow of the Houses of Parliament would be teeming with cabinet ministers tripping over themselves to hail a wonderful general election victory, or if things didn't go quite as planned, saying they're disappointed and saying how they hope to govern in the national interest. This afternoon, well, I can't really see any cabinet ministers. I've been speaking to ministers, they say they are profoundly disappointed with this election result and they are furious and they are blaming Theresa May and her very small circle of advisers. Particular anger has been aimed at Theresa May's gatekeepers, Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy. Do you think she might need to have a rethink of how she runs things, the inner circle, the two chiefs of staff?
I think the Cabinet will demand a rethink. I think they will say we have to do things differently around here. You have to widen the circle of people that advise you. You have to listen to across the party.
For the moment, this diminished Prime Minister will attempt to govern with the help of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists, probably a confidence and supply arrangement in which they would support a Queen's speech and a budget. That will mean lots of late nights as Theresa May seeks to pass other legislation. The proposed tie-up with a party that opposes gay marriage and abortion is causing alarm among Tory modernisers, notably the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson. And then there is the small matter of Brexit. Theresa May called this general election to give herself a free hand in the Brexit negotiations and to ensure she is hostage to no one. That calculation has backfired in spectacular fashion, and she may well now find that she's pulled it in all directions. There will be the hardline Eurosceptics who demand that she lives up to her commitment to pull out of the single market and to pull out of most of the customs union. But then there'll be a contingent of Tories in Scotland who will want precisely the opposite. And to cap it all, there is the DUP who has talked about how they want a special customs arrangement to protect Northern Ireland. However, two veterans of the Northern Ireland peace process say there are inherent dangers in relying on DUP support.
Well, firstly, I think it's a very big mistake. Since 1991, the British government has made it clear that it is neutral in Northern Ireland. It doesn't take sides between Unionists, Nationalists and Republicans. To change that would be a catastrophic mistake. It would really undermine the whole basis of the peace agreement, And furthermore, it would make it incredibly difficult to set up a new executive in Northern Ireland. Up to now, the British government has been the neutral party trying to bring the two sides together. How can it possibly pretend to be neutral when it's supported by one particular party that can pull the plug on it at any stage? So I think it really could undermine all that we've achieved over the last several decades in Northern Ireland, and I think it's a big, big mistake.
I think this election has got us to a situation where actually independence for Scotland is a long way off. I don't think we're going to go there for a long time. I think the issue for the Union of the United Kingdom, is now going to focus much more on Northern Ireland.
The traditional journey in the early hours of the morning by the election winner from their constituency to London should be a triumphal drive. Instead, Theresa May was left to contemplate with her husband Philip May how the gamble she took with great reluctance has left her premiership in grave peril.
It's amazing how much the trajectory matters, isn't it? She got more votes than Labour, but still it doesn't feel that way. Well, look, Eric Pickles was a Conservative MP for 25 years until this election, former Cabinet Minister and former Chair of the Conservative Party. I caught up with him earlier. Eric Pickles, can you think of a self-inflicted political wound bigger than the one we've just seen?
Yes, I probably can, but I don't
See if
think.
you can. See if you can.
But I don't think that really matters. What matters is what you do with it. Anybody can be a great leader when everything is going well. Now, Theresa's going to be tested, and I think she'll pass the test in terms of being able to get a majority in the House of Commons for what she wants to do, and then being able to start the process of Brexit.
Let's go through some apologies. Do you think the Conservative Party should apologise for invoking a 2-year Article 50 period and then wasting 8 weeks by having an election campaign, which they obviously assumed they would win, because it would have been ridiculous to invoke Article 50 if you didn't think you were going to win?
I don't think in the end it makes an earth of the difference, because of course the real meat of the negotiation was always going to be in the autumn. The talks that we're about to have in a couple of weeks is largely procedural in terms of setting out the order of things and agreeing to a programme of activity. So in truth, I don't think it would make a bit of difference.
OK, one last apology. Vote Tory, get DUP. Or the DUP will have a position of influence in the government of the UK now, much stronger than many of your voters would have expected or would have wanted. Would you apologise to them that they've ended up getting something that they perhaps didn't anticipate?
Well, I don't believe for a moment, in terms of our broader policies, that having an understanding with the DUP to be able to deliver many of our manifesto commitments is something that we should apologise.
You don't think there'll be any concessions to the DUP for supporting the government?
Well, I've no idea, because I'm not.
Well, one would expect there would be, because they're going to want some concessions, whether it's motorways in Northern Ireland or hospitals and school buildings.
But the alternative of Mr. Corbyn renationalising everything, of a very radical programme, I think is worth following. And that's the nature of politics. And the reason why it's worthwhile doing is this. We got more votes than Labour. We got more MPs than Labour. And I think she has an ability to be able to try and put together a coalition to survive.
What about the Brexit mandate? Because a lot of the Corbyn votes were by Remainers who didn't like the hard Brexit vision of Theresa May. She asked for the mandate. She clearly didn't get the mandate, did she? Or is your contention that she now has a mandate to deliver the Brexit she suggested she wanted?
The mandate she has is an ability to be able to pass the process through the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Now, of course, she has to be very cognizant of the size of her majority. And
just a bit.
And my own view, and it's always been one, this is the biggest deal outside the Second World War for this country, is it shouldn't just be a conservative view, that we should reach across to people beyond our party. I've always felt that, to Labour, to Liberal Democrats, and to the DUP.
And do you think a much softer Brexit, or no Brexit, but a much softer Brexit, one that leaves us in the single market and the customs union, is now likely?
I think being able to stay as full members of both those just about impossible, and it wasn't really what the public voted for. Now, the question is the level of access and what we need to do to get that level of access. And it could be that the price that we have to pay, which probably relates to free movement, might be the one that would be unpalatable to the British public.
How long do you think Theresa May can hang on?
I think she can do the full term.
5 years?
I think
Are you joking?
No, I'm not joking. I'm an esteemed person like your good self.
Right, I mean, a hung parliament, you think can last 5 years?
A hung parliament all over Europe, all over the world lasts.
With a damaged leader, with a very badly damaged leader.
And as I said earlier, this is her big test. It's how you deal with adversity. And I believe, actually, that she will rise to the occasion.
Eric Pickles talking to me earlier. So how is this going to play out from here? What does it all mean for the Conservatives and for Labour? Nadine Zahawi is the newly re-elected Tory MP for Stratford-upon-Avon. John Prescott, Lord Prescott, is Labour royalty and was Deputy Prime Minister for a decade under Tony Blair. She's not going to make 5 years, Nadine. You're not going to try and sustain that line, are you?
Well, if you look at what we're about to embark upon, which is this incredible negotiation with our European colleagues of the Brexit. I sat on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the last Parliament, and we had an inquiry into what happens if there's no deal. When we asked the question of Lord Hill, Jonathan Hill, who's our last commissioner, a man steeped in sort of EU understanding, his advice was that all parties should come together and back the Prime Minister with a strong mandate to negotiate. Right.
So she would then obviously have to compromise on her vision to accommodate the other parties' views as well, correct? There's no point in just saying, why don't you all come in and back me? She has to then accommodate and compromise.
I'd take a step back and say, when you negotiate, you've got to have a mandate to negotiate and then bring back the deal to Parliament, which we've already.
Yeah, but
both
there's
the
no
Prime
point
Minister
in saying, there's no
and
point in saying we have a big tent, but everybody has to just do what I want to do. You'd have to say that would mean softening the Brexit, right?
Right, but when you're negotiating with 27 other countries,
well, then what are you saying?
What you need is what I'm saying is in the national interest, which is what Jonathan Hill said, come together. And this is the sort of my big offer tonight to Lord Prescott. Come together, offer that mandate in the national interest, let the Prime Minister negotiate. In that negotiating process, we're going to come back to Parliament anyway.
Do you find this interesting, Lord Prescott? Would you be up for that?
Well, first of all, be lucky if she lasts for 5 months. She's no longer got the authority or the strength. Listening to Pickles there, talking about, well, she could go 5 years. He must be in another world. Where they're going to get the split is much in the party lines of the Tories, because once we get down to Brexit, make no mistake, it will split the Tory party. So we're going to see a lot of politics going on. She's not strong enough to handle it. It's a parliament full of Remainers, and you can't think for a moment, just on that one issue, she can handle it. She says she's going to meet 27 negotiators, prime ministers. She couldn't handle 7 party leaders in a debate here, and that's one of the problems now. So I think the party problems will become big here, and I don't think the coalition can last. What? With the Democratic Unionists, I don't think that can last. So what we need to do on both parties, I think in the Labour Party, for example, we have a different approach. We've laid out what our position is to the Brexit negotiations.
Well, she's laid out her objectives.
Yes, but at the end of the day, why she called the election was because she thought that the Labour Party had voted against it. It's probably so.
John, you say that we have a parliament full of Remainers. Matteo Renzi, the Italian Prime Minister at the time of Brexit, said, look, we've got to deliver a good Brexit for both the British people and the Europeans, because if you don't, then you render democracy meaningless. So this idea that we're still in 2 tribes, that there's a tribe of Remainers and there's a tribe of Leavers,
I don't think that's right. Conservative. Look, politics is changing quite radically at the moment. Make no mistake about it. Young people have decided to have some say in it, right? The politics is changing to such an extent that certainly for the Labour Party, we need to get our act together. We didn't win that election, but perhaps if we hadn't had a 2/3 no vote in Jeremy and a few cryptic comments, if they will now come together, and at the moment I can't keep up with people who now say we were wrong. Mandelson on television saying we were wrong.
So
Let's change.
they need to come back. They need to join the shadow cabinet. And does Jeremy Corbyn need to stick, or does he need to stick at his manifesto? Should he Should he compromise a little to try and make it easier for them to come
I think
in?
the manifesto...
Or is he now
the
just
manifesto's up. That was one of the big things that happened in my touring around the marginals. When that manifesto came out, that's enthused people.
You were Deputy Prime Minister under Tony Blair.
Yeah.
Corbyn hasn't got a good word for Tony Blair, has he? I mean, it's interesting. The
I know,
party's
but
had
it's
such a
Corbyn
journey,
who's
and
the
you've
leader.
just like sailed
He's
along
overwhelmingly
you've sailed
voted
along
twice as the leader, right?
It's two
He's
different
get out.
parties. The Blair party that you were Deputy Prime Minister in, and now you're...
I know, but
you've just like, joined this other Corbyn party as though you've done...
I was what they called old Labour, not new Labour. And the values in that manifesto are more to do with the old Labour values. But the point is, the public liked it, the youngsters liked it. We won't move away from that manifesto. Get that case over to the public.
Why didn't they scrap tuition fees under Tony Blair and Lord Prescott? Actually, they put them up. They trebled them.
Well, you
the man,
you can offer anything to
I want to
everybody.
go back to
It's
Theresa
very
May.
easy to do
Politics
that
have changed.
when you don't have the responsibility of balancing the books.
Look, the politics has changed.
Politics has changed, and you're
Changed
right about the young, and
fundamentally.
you're right about
In
engagement.
Parliament it's changing, in the parties it's changing. You now have to adjust to a new kind of electorate.
I want to talk, because we never got an answer from you on Theresa May, and I think you just skirted off it because you didn't want to answer it. She said she didn't have a big enough mandate when she had a majority. She now has less of a majority. She has no mandate, does she? And no mandate, certainly for the Brexit vision she has.
By her own definition.
But she's also...
By her definition.
Look, you're absolutely right. And to pretend otherwise would be insulting your viewers and yourself.
Or another U-turn.
No, hold on. But she's also a Democrat. She will accept the outcome of this election.
She won't
we're
debate
the
it,
largest,
never mind
we're the
accept
largest
it.
party.
She won't debate it.
We're the largest party. We can govern. And I think you've got to remember, Theresa May really does care about the national interest and getting a good deal out of the negotiations. Will you shake your head, Evan?
No, the electorate shakes their head.
She genuinely cares about this.
They all care.
But what she's
genuinely...
she does care about what happens in the next 2 years.
Do you think
that really does matter?
Do you think it matters if we change Prime Minister mid, or even have another election mid Article 50 process? I mean, because it could obviously complicate the whole Brexit thing.
I don't think that's the right thing to do.
So
Absolutely
you think Theresa May can make 5 years?
I think she can make 5 years. I tell you
we
what,
can hold you to that. And so when she makes 5 months, and you won't say, well, we all knew it was only going to be 5 months.
He'll tell you why he's changed his mind.
No, hold on a second. This is all going to rest on the negotiations. If Labour are responsible and actually do the right thing in the national interest, then I think we can get there.
But what we demand,
if they play politics
what we
with this,
demand from those negotiations,
Lord Prescott,
what you got from negotiations is quite different to them. We've laid it out and spelt it out. So when it comes to debate, if they say bad deal, no deal, all those kind of arguments, she comes back, we will vote against it if it doesn't meet our criteria.
If they came to you and said, let us agree a mandate that is a compromise between your vision and the Conservative vision, would you be up for that kind of thing, so that Britain has a united front?
If it's near to what Labour has laid down as its requirements for those negotiations, that's where the splits will come, because we're not prepared just to accept.
But you want to control our borders.
Trust me, I'm going to negotiate. She's just been rejected by most of the elect who don't believe her. She's done so many U-turns. She won't survive.
One thing we do have to keep reminding ourselves is she got more votes than the Labour Party, because it's easy to sort of get into the mindset of her losing the election, but she did get more votes.
Yeah, but she needs to have parliamentary authority to implement whatever she's doing.
We need to leave it there, both.
Got it.
Gents, thank you very much indeed. Now, the Prime Minister's new reliance on the DUP could have knock-on effects in Northern Ireland, where, remember, the power-sharing government broke down earlier this year. Alex Maskey is a senior Sinn Féin official and a member of the Stormont Assembly. He joins me from Belfast. Very good evening to you. Look, first question, are you not tempted to take your seats? It's a very finely balanced parliament. You could probably make a difference if you took your seats in that building behind me and back Jeremy Corbyn, for example.
Well, I think history has shown us that the British government has had virtually no interest here in the affairs of the business of people here, because, let's face it, and even in terms of the referendum around Brexit, the majority of people here in the north of Ireland voted to remain in the EU. British government, despite that, are determined to drag us out of the EU. In the recent elections, the British government, the Tory party, didn't receive one MP elected here in the north of Ireland. In fact, any of their candidates who ran got a very derisory number of votes. So Theresa May has absolutely no mandate here.
But just to be clear, you will not take seats in Westminster, even if there's a very finely balanced vote, for example, on something like Brexit. You would not take your seats here, even if you could make the difference to, for example, reversing or softening Brexit.
We have actually had a very strong mandate, and in fact we've taken seats from the SDLP, for example, who have been arguing for years that they needed to be in Westminster to have their voice heard. The nationalist population here have acknowledged that that voice has been repeatedly ignored, and contemptuously so, and our party has received a very sizable mandate to stay away from Westminster. The Northern nationalist population have decided that no longer do we have any confidence whatsoever in people in Westminster to look after our interests. Now, we will do that on the island of Ireland.
Now, a very important principle has been that the British government is neutral between unionists and nationalists in Northern Ireland. Are you confident that the British government can remain neutral, and will respect that neutrality if it is reliant on DUP votes in order to maintain its majority here in London?
Well, I think this current arrangement may well prove to be reckless, but we'll have to wait and see. We will reflect on that. We have argued for some considerable time, particularly in recent times. The British government have been working in cahoots with particularly the Democratic Unionist Party to the disadvantage of the political process here. In fact, they called off the talks here very recently to re-establish our institutions. And I would add that the British public should actually have close scrutiny of the DUP and what that party represents and their behaviour in government here, because we have no government here in the north of Ireland precisely because of the behaviour and the arrogance and the alleged corruption of the DUP in government here in the north. So, you know, people need to make sure they understand what they're getting if they get the DUP in the government with the Tory party.
What do you think the DUP will want to get out of Theresa May when they sit and say, we can give you a majority?
Well, the only thing that the DUP have ever really argued for, first of all, they've been in a craven way supportive of the Tories. They're supportive of the austerity agenda. They're supportive of the cuts. They're supporting Brexit. And that's notwithstanding the fact that the majority of people here in the north, including many unionists, voted to remain in the EU. So the DUP are going to face a mighty challenge, because they're now going to go into an arrangement with the Tory party in Britain to exercise and to implement Brexit against the wishes of their own community here in the north of Ireland. So that'll be a significant challenge for the DUP to square away. Are the DUP going to support policies which will foment and create further austerity, budget cuts to our health service and so on? So I think those are big challenges which the DUP will have to face. But I would urge the British public to scrutinise the membership of the DUP, their behaviour in government here, their homophobia, their behaviour on race issues, their discriminatory policies here. All of these matters led to the downfall of our institutions here just a number of months ago, and that's the party that Theresa May is looking to bring into government with herself in London.
Mr Maskey, just one last one. Clearly the arrangements, the Good Friday Agreement arrangements, have broken down. There's some possibility even of direct rule from Westminster, which I know you would hate. How bad can it get? What is the worst case, do you think, over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, if things don't improve?
Well, let's be very clear. The British government are co-guarantor, if you like. They have to implement and be truthful and faithful to the Good Friday Agreement. It's an international binding treaty between the British government and the Irish government. So we will expect the British government to honour their commitments in respect of the Good Friday Agreement. That means that they have to remain neutral, and we will be very carefully monitoring the behaviour of the British government in the time ahead. But remember this, one of the reasons why the Sinn Féin received a very resounding mandate to stay away from Westminster is because the nationalist population has seen the behaviour, the partisan behaviour of this current British government over the last number of years. So therefore we will watch what's happening very carefully in terms of how the British government behaves, and as I've said, this will lead to a serious political challenge.
Alex Maskey, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks. Well, let's face it, the result last night was most interesting because it was not predicted. In the last polls, only Salvation actually got there, although YouGov had done quite well in the weeks before. We can look forward to yet another inquest on that, but more interesting than why the polls got it wrong is why the result actually occurred. For much of the campaign, Jeremy Corbyn was written off. So how did we get where we are? Partly Remainers voted for Corbyn to soften Brexit. partly many other people voted for Corbyn, as he was the one who promised the most radical change. Well, our policy editor, Chris Cook, has spent the last 2 months trying to make sense of the campaign. He's with me now to help us understand some of the numbers behind the results. And what do we know, Chris, about who voted which way?
Well, some of what we know is, at this point, we don't have good polling on who voted which way, but we can infer things from the actual constituency results, from the real numbers. And we know, for example, that areas with more younger people saw much bigger swings to the Labour Party. We know that areas where there were more Remain voters saw much bigger swings to the Labour Party, and conversely, the Tories did better in leavier areas. And we know that where there were older people, there were more Tory voters, despite all the dementia tax stuff. It's also worth noting one slightly curious thing. We observed a lot that the polls were showing that a large number of UKIP voters were going to go to the Conservatives. That's what the polls suggested. Working through the numbers today, it looks like something slightly curious happened, which is that if you take the average seat where there was a UKIP candidate standing, roughly half of the people who voted for UKIP in 2015 went to the Conservative Party. About a quarter of the people who voted UKIP in 2015 went to the Labour Party, and there was a sort of residual core UKIP who've remained. But remember, UKIP didn't stand that many candidates this year, and it turns out that that quarter, when they were in seats where there wasn't a UKIP candidate, basically tended to vote for the Labour Party.
Right.
So the
most hardcore UKIP supporters
are more Labour-y
than they are.
Exactly, they're anti-establishment voters. And so it means that UKIP standing down, which we thought was probably going to help the Conservatives, probably helped the Labour Party.
Right, that's interesting. Now, what about the polling miss then?
So the most interesting polling miss is the one that no one has really much talked about yet, which is the fact that Britain's two political parties, who spend much, much more money and much more time and are supposed to be much more expert than any newspaper at predicting a result, were both totally thrown yesterday. Even after the exit polls came out, they were both quibbling with the answers, with the results. The Conservative Party, it looks like, even in the final straight, was double digits wrong on how big they thought their lead was going to be over the Labour Party. And actually, we've been tracking where they've been campaigning, and it sort of all suddenly makes sense when you realise they thought they were 11, 12, 13 points ahead of the Labour Party.
OK, Chris, thanks. Well, so that's a sense of where the votes came from last night and where they went. The result, as we know, was that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour secured their best result for almost 20 years. It left a weakened Prime Minister and an emboldened opposition. David Grossman looks at what happened and how we got to where we are.
Canterbury in Kent is a good place from which to tell the tale of how Labour sliced, diced and devoured Theresa May's majority. Like Chaucer's tales, this is not one story, but a set of overlapping narratives that combined to turn this solid Conservative seat with a 10,000 majority into a Labour victory.
Of course, the Labour Party didn't exist in Chaucer's day, but the fact that a seat like this, that resisted the charms of Tony Blair, Harold Wilson and even Clement Attlee, should suddenly fall to the party of Jeremy Corbyn suggests something extraordinary happened.
Rosemary Clare Duffield is duly elected Member of Parliament.
Rosie Duffield never expected to win.
I have to get someone in my office.
A single mum who writes comedy, the joke is now on the Conservatives. While they were warning about a coalition of chaos, she was quietly assembling a coalition of concerns.
People are really worried about where they're going to go if they need a hospital. Austerity has played a part. People here are dependent on tax credits. Bedroom tax. I see people crying on the doorsteps paying their bedroom tax when their husband's passed away or their children have moved from their home. All of those things that affect real people's daily lives were really what galvanised everyone to get out and vote, I think.
Canterbury has 40,000 students. If the election had been next week, they would have been on holiday, perhaps out of town, perhaps voting somewhere else. Instead, they were mobilised and energised by Jeremy Corbyn. The turnout of young voters like Lizzie, Michael and Beth was decisive in many of the seats that Labour's vote surged.
Does something feel different about Jeremy Corbyn?
I think so, yeah. I think he's just engaging so much more with the younger people, the younger generations. Obviously, he's touching on things like tuition fees, although perhaps, you know, them getting scrapped completely is a little bit unrealistic. He's trying his best to kind of provide us with a better future.
I'm supporting someone who is supporting the NHS, supporting education, supporting the arts, rather than someone who, you know, had opinions in the 80s, which, you know, I don't know about. I'm not basing my opinions on that. I'm basing them on what he's telling us today and what the Labour manifestos are, you know, today.
Hello, John.
John McDonnell was one of the architects of Labour's strategy. He says they deliberately operated under the radar of conventional politics.
How did you turn what looked like an unplayable hand, if every commentator in Westminster was to be believed, into one that's delivered you an increase in seats?
We've had a long discussion over a number of years about how we can change the nature of the political discourse in this country. We took a very strong view during Jeremy's leadership campaign 2 years ago that what we have to do is almost reflect his character, which is about positive politics. Don't go into yaboo politics. None of this nasty stuff that we've seen in the media and from other parties as well. And if we can do that, and if we use traditional methods, like sort of touring around the country, we've reinvented word of mouth as a form of political communication, but then also try and cut through some of the bias in the written media, which has been appalling, to be honest. But by the use of social media and live broadcasts, we think we can communicate.
But hang on, say Jeremy Corbyn's critics in Labour. Although the party has smashed through expectations and gained 30 seats, Mr Corbyn still only has about as many as Gordon Brown won in 2010.
How do those people who were vociferous in their criticism of him play it from here on in, do you think?
There's only two things we have to do. Really properly learn what went right in this campaign, because you can talk about it and you can assert and you can assume. Let's do some research, let's actually work out what happened, what really worked, and do more of it. And then also work out what it was that held us back. With the Tory party in free fall, why are we not the largest single party?
But that inquiry won't start just yet. Tonight, another win. Kensington in London is hardly anyone's idea of a Labour seat, but on a second recount and by 20 votes, it now has a Labour MP.
David Grossman there. Well, let's think about the role of the political centre a bit with Phil Collins, Times columnist, who's been an outspoken critic of Jeremy Corbyn and before the election suggested the Labour Party would split over his leadership. Made various other predictions too. Rachel Shabby writes for The Guardian and has been supportive of Corbyn's leadership. Phil, first, you just want to add your voice to the apologies and reconsiderations that have been made by so many people today?
Well, I've been doing nothing all day other than eating humble pie. I mean, it was a fantastically better performance than I thought could happen. And it's incredibly interesting about why. It makes you question all your assumptions if you're at all reflective. And I think we will reflect on them. And it's always been the assumption of people in the Labour Party, on the Labour Party's right, that you couldn't win an election from the left. And though the Labour Party didn't win this election, we need to remember that, and it's still some way from doing so, it definitely throws into question that assumption. And it's really interesting to think about it, to work out what was new in this, because I think a lot was new in the surge that happened to the Labour Party. So yeah, it's not so much an apology as a reconsideration.
Yeah. And do you think they could win the next election? If we had another election, say, in 18 months' time, minority government collapses or whatever, do you think Corbyn's Labour could actually win?
Yeah, bring it on. I mean,
do you feel?
Well, I don't
know.
I'm
sorry. I just want to hear Phil. One word, Phil.
Well, I wouldn't be confident to say no. I mean, the conventional view is
no, I didn't want the point. I wasn't Rachel. I just wanted you to say yes or no.
All right, I don't know.
It's no good.
What held it back from this time? Because actually they had, in a way, a rather bad opposition campaign, didn't they? So what is the thing that still needs to happen?
No, they didn't have a bad opposition campaign.
Sorry, bad government campaign. They were against a very bad campaign.
But they ran an extremely good campaign. Well, the things that made it go forward were that, once the public was given a chance to see Jeremy Corbyn as he is, it turned out that he was really popular. His ratings went up as the campaign progressed. He has a credibility and an integrity that people can relate to. The other big thing, of course, was the fact that the Labour Party tacked left for the first time. And this is something that people on the left of the party have been saying for some time. They've been saying the party has hemorrhaged voters because it has not shifted to the left, because there is a hunger for genuine left-wing politics that aren't being served by the existing parties.
Against a better Tory campaign or a better Tory leader, do you think it would have...
I agree with Rachel. I think you're doing Labour a disservice by saying it was a bad Tory campaign. It was in one sense, in that Theresa May was exposed as not very good. But the Tories were polling 44% when the campaign began, and they got about 44%. They didn't actually shed votes during the campaign. I think actually it's a Labour growth which is the real story, and I think that is remarkable, because that never happens. You never find leaders recovering like Jeremy Corbyn recovered, and that is a really amazing thing.
What happens now then to the moderates? First of all, Rachel, what do you think happens to the moderates? They do what Phil's doing, they eat their humble pie, they come in and they say, OK, we're a renewed Labour Party? Is that what...
Well, you know, it's exactly what the party has been doing for the past 6 weeks, which is to unite and fight a very powerful campaign together. And I think what will happen now that the Labour Party has had such a surge, you know, 40% share in the vote was considered impossible just weeks ago. The parliamentary party will cohere and unite and be an effective opposition to a very weak and dodgy coalition. But meanwhile, because this bit is important. Yeah, meanwhile, you know, the parliamentary party will be in a feedback loop with the grassroots, and they will mobilise, and they will get all their different strands of their supporters to come together and to fight grassroots causes. And once you have a parliamentary party that is focused and engaged with the grassroots, then that can create an extraordinary power.
Phil, do you agree with that?
Well,
it's going to be a unified party from here on
I
out.
think it will be now, but what the moderates need to do is something quite different. They need to start thinking. The thing I most regret about the last few years of Labour politics is that the right has had nothing interesting to say.
Yeah.
And it has given up the idea of hope and spirit that was galvanised by Corbyn. Now, that could have been galvanised by the right if it had anything interesting to say 5 years ago,
So
but it
basically,
hasn't had.
Britain will not have a Macron, is what you're both saying, because we will have a left alternative and the Tory party, which is in kind of alliance with the DUP or something like that, and that the Macron vision...
Evan, I think one other thing which you have to take from this campaign is the politics is so volatile that it moves so fast that 2 years from now we could be in completely different territory. So I wouldn't say that for certain.
So sorry, we need to leave it there, sorry. Thanks both. Well, earlier today, I spoke to an excited Remain-supporting politician who thought that the close election is the end of Brexit. It can't happen now, he said. For the moment, that is a minority view, given the fact that the two leading parties are still committed to it. But the election does complicate things. One, because the government has less authority and needs parliamentary support from elsewhere, and two, because the mandate for Theresa May's version is far weaker than anyone expected. Will we start again? Do we know where we're heading? It was March the 29th that we handed over the letter invoking Article 50 and the countdown to Brexit began. We should probably have had our election before the clock started ticking, but hey, what's done is done.
Article 50 process is now underway.
However, what we thought had been done was a Tory plan for the negotiations. To die-hard Remainers, that no longer feels like a done deal. So, is a softer Brexit possible or even likely now? Well, the first route to one could be via the Democratic Unionists. The DUP support Brexit, but they could say they want a softer one as a condition of supporting Theresa May.
I mean, there could be pressure that makes the Prime Minister herself want to change the line she's taking, or if she depends on more people for her majority. Quite interesting that the DUP, who she's talking about, don't say no deal is a better option than a bad deal. That's not in their manifesto. They talk about getting a deal. They talk about working sensibly with the European Union.
Order! Order. Then there's a second route, the Commons, a new parliament with new MPs and their own new mandate, and a weakened Prime Minister. Now, most MPs, given a free choice, would probably opt for a far softer Brexit than the Theresa May one, but MPs won't be given a free choice, so it will all come down to the Westminster maths. If there's a reliable Tory DUP arrangement, well, it'll have an effective majority of about 16. That majority will include some unreliable Tory MPs like Ken Clarke or Anna Soubry, who might well rebel. So the outcome would all hinge on how many others there are like them.
A formal parliamentary process, though, is quite hard to envisage that doesn't involve at least some people being prepared to bring down the government.
No one knows right now whether MPs will comply or not when it comes to Brexit. But we do know this is not just about the UK. There's 28 of us in this relationship. What do the others think? Today, the EU President congratulated Theresa May with a reminder to get a move on. There's no time to lose. I'm fully committed to maintaining regular and close contact, he says. Those others may not give us more time.
Brussels is ready to negotiate, and they're very ready, and they have all the negotiators, and they just need somebody to negotiate with. And it doesn't look like Britain is able to start negotiations in 11 days on very good terms, is it? We know that Britain needed some stability and, yes, a strong mandate to negotiate Brexit, and it doesn't look at all stable from a European perspective.
It's a year since the referendum, and guess what? We're still not clear about where we're going. Well, our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, spent the day in Brussels. He joins me from there. So, Mark, is the feeling that soft Brexit of some form is more likely with a weakened Theresa May?
Well, Evan, I've got to be the harbinger of bad news, I think. There are optimists and there are pessimists. I think the pessimists are the more dominant in this town. This sort of get a move on idea is because people here are very conscious of the complexity of the negotiation that effectively has to be done in about 15 months before early autumn next year for various reasons. And the longer this goes on, if, for example, there has to be a whole rethink in London before they start negotiating in earnest, the less likely there is to be a deal at all. I think there is more fear of a sort of chaotic end to these negotiations. Remember also that if there is a real move in Britain towards something quite different, then those statements you heard in your piece about, well, the European point of view is we're ready. Well, they're all ready for something else, which was Theresa May's original conception of Brexit, e.g. no single market membership, and would have to go back to the 27 member governments to completely rethink the EU negotiating position. That said, there are some optimists who take a slightly more positive view, if you like, and think, well, you know, maybe we will get something much closer to the so-called Norway option or something like that. And one person I was talking to today, there was a very interesting slip. He referred to Brexit, or whatever it's called, by the end.
Mark, negotiations are meant to start on Monday. Is it Monday week? Do people really believe that's going to happen?
Well, once again, EU is saying we're ready, let's get cracking. But some fascinating things you hear here. For example, there's no agreement yet, I'm told, about where it'll actually be and where the regular meetings will take place and the press conferences afterwards, that type of thing. So there's a lot to be done in a short space of time, if indeed they are to start on Monday week.
And Mark, I mean, the worry that you've mentioned of no deal by the end of the 2 years, I mean, obviously they could extend the time if every single party to this agreed. Is that a serious worry?
Yes, look, they could extend the time. I think the other thing that we could see as this process develops is an increased emphasis on the so-called transitional arrangements, the importance of there being no cliff edge for European industries, of course, services as well as UK ones, and using the transitional package as a way of just dealing with the immediate Article 50 issues and then accepting the other issues will take a lot longer. But, you know, let's think about what's got to happen in the next 15 or so months, particularly if it's much harder to resolve, to get a majority around a particular negotiating stance. We heard John Prescott earlier in the programme and the possibility of the Tory party fracturing. You know, it's quite possible that some sort of deal is agreed that the UK Parliament wouldn't then vote for.
Mark, thank you very much. Well, if two-party politics reasserted itself across most of the UK, with the vote share and the third and fourth place parties declining massively, in Scotland it was the end of one-party politics. The SNP went from virtual monopoly to merely very dominant in Scottish Westminster seats. So we'll leave Westminster now and head to Edinburgh, where Kirsty can take us through the implications. Evening, Kirsty.
Evening, Evan. Well, Scotland always has had the ability to be contrary, and perhaps it's in the DNA. But nobody could have foreseen that a Tory revival north of the border would keep Theresa May in Downing Street. Ruth Davidson's leadership taking the scalps of such big SNP beasts as Alex Salmond and Angus Robertson, the SNP's leader at Westminster. Well, tomorrow Ruth Davidson will march her brand new MPs to the new stronghold of Stirling. So we went ahead to the heart of the country. Stirling, scene of some of Scotland's epic battles in centuries past. Here, an SNP majority of almost 10,500 was wiped out by those former SNP voters turning on their party, its record, its leader and independence. High over Stirling, the monument to Braveheart, William Wallace, the hero who took on the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297 and won in the first wars of Scottish independence. But like Wallace, who needed that momentum, the SNP were a party of forward momentum. Last night that was stopped in its tracks, and it was stopped in its tracks by the new Braveheart of the Union, Ruth Davidson.
I voted for Conservative.
And was that a change?
It was a change, yes.
What did you vote before?
I voted in the past SNP.
Before you were happy to vote SNP on the basis that it was a vote for Scotland, not for independence.
Well, it was for me a vote for the people of Scotland at that particular time and not so much for myself as an individual. This time I felt it was for Nicola Sturgeon and not so much the people of Scotland.
And that was something I heard more than once, and perhaps informed the First Minister's conciliatory tone today.
As we do after all elections, we will reflect on these results, we will listen to voters, and we will consider very carefully the best way forward for Scotland, a way forward that is in the interests of all of Scotland.
Speaking to voters in Stirling today, there was a very strong sense that it was too much Nicola Sturgeon, not enough about the people of Scotland in this election campaign.
Yeah, quite a contrast from just 2 years ago when Nicola Sturgeon was not just the dominant figure in Scottish politics, but it seemed UK politics.
So is a second independence referendum now dead?
It's certainly further back than it was. I think the First Minister herself has acknowledged it was a factor and she will be compelled to respond to that.
Stirling has shifted from Labour to SNP to Tory in 2 years. This is a restless and unforgiving constituency.
Students are quite backing of independence at times, but there's also a sort of conservatism behind it. That a lot of people in the area don't really want to head straight into independence. So I think another referendum definitely was in the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
But there was no doubt that the Scottish Conservative leader herself was a big draw.
Conservative.
I was the same.
Had you voted Conservative before?
Never.
Well, tell me how impressed are you by Ruth Davidson?
Ruth Davidson. La femme formidable.
Yeah.
She's quite impressive actually, quite a formidable opponent.
And today, Ruth Davidson addressed her party's wider problems.
But just as the SNP must listen to the result on the independence referendum, we also have to listen to voters who did not give the UK Conservative Party the mandate we sought. It is incumbent on us to listen to other parties in Parliament and to people outside it about the best way forward.
You can be pretty sure that Ruth Davidson now knows her own strength. But it is extraordinary to think that you could have Scottish Conservative MPs keeping Theresa May in power.
Yeah, this election result is completely the wrong way round. I think you have to go back to 1945 to find the Scottish Conservatives doing relatively better than the party in England and Wales.
Does this make Ruth Davidson the most powerful politician in the United Kingdom?
It's a very interesting question. Potentially.
Not only was the political map of Scotland redrawn last night, the country now truly is a four-party state, something else fundamental shifted. The way Scotland thinks of itself and where it thinks its future lies. And the repercussions of that will be felt far beyond the Scottish border. And I think we can look for two things from Ruth Davidson. She wanted a soft Brexit. She would like to see access to the single market in return for free movement. And I think she will temper what is on offer from Theresa May. And the second thing she'll be noisier about. And that is the whole question of same-sex marriage. If Theresa May is going to do a deal with the DUP, that's going to be very, very tough. Emily.
Absolutely critical. Thanks, Kirsty. Well, right here in the studio, we've got a panel who we're inviting to tear up the old questions, to tell us the new way we should be looking at the world on the back of this result. To them in a moment. But first, at the heart of the elections, their numbers, their polls, their swings, their majorities, are the people we choose to represent us. Some of the moments of the night were the faces of those who lost or who clung on by the barest of victories. Our filmmaker Nick Blakemore spent much of the campaign in the marginal seat of Barron-Furness in Cumbria, where the incumbent Labour MP John Woodcock believed he was going to lose his seat. Spoiler alert, if you follow the results, you might know the ending to this one. But Nick was with the MP as he watched the night unfold.
My sense is that the margin, the margin is probably just too tight for me to hold on. I'll be so sad, but time and time again there is this the concern that comes up on the doorsteps is around Jeremy generally and in this constituency. On top of that, the future of the shipyard specifically.
John, what's the message this morning?
The message for this morning is basically shipyard is safe, but the community won't be safe from a landslide Tory government. I mean, I've been. It's been such a strange campaign because, I think myself, like so many others, have desperately wanted to make this about local issues. You know, you've had this weird implosion of the Tory national campaign, which I very much hope otherwise, but I fear may be giving some people false hope.
It's 10 o'clock. The general election has been decided. The result of the joint BBC, ITV and Sky exit poll, it projects that the Conservatives will be the largest party in the new Parliament, but on these figures, they will lose their overall majority.
It's going to be really, really tight.
I think the margins are down in some bits, but they're up in others. Like some of the places where the Tories usually rack up stonking margins, they haven't done.
And I do hereby declare that Marsha Chantal de Cordova, Jane Ellison, Financial Secretary to the Treasury, is defeated.
No one understands. They tell you they understand what's happened. They are lying. No one expected this.
I am hearing absolutely nothing other than it's close. So, going to go in and see how the troops are getting on.
Woodcock is looking at possibly just scraping home is quite a turnaround when Labour frankly were expecting to be defeated here to the tune of thousands of votes. I, the undersigned, being the acting returning officer for the above constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows: John Zach Woodcock, Labour and Cooperative Party, 22,592, and that the undermentioned person has been duly elected to serve as a Member of Parliament for the Barrow and Furness County constituency, John Zach Woodcock.
I'm so deeply proud to stand in front of you here and to be able to keep on fighting for our community
in Westminster in, well, let's hope it's years ahead after tonight. Thank you so much, everybody.
Just one personal story there. John Woodcock, seat of Barron-Furness. Well, let's try and make some sense of what's happened and where we're headed now. I'm joined by Matthew Paris, the former Tory MP and now columnist for The Times. David Hare, playwright, screenwriter and director. Rennie Edo-Lodge is a journalist and writer. And Peter Oborne's the associate editor of The Spectator. It's lovely to have you all here. And Rennie, I'm going to start with you, because I think one thing that struck us was that younger people saw and heard a completely different campaign to other older generations. Newsfeed different, the kind of things you picked up on were not the things that the rest of us were seeing.
Well, absolutely, and I think actually the Parliamentary Labour Party and a lot of the tabloid press absolutely played a huge part in this, in sort of making Jeremy Corbyn the underdog and somebody to root for, not to mention that sort of younger people aren't really paying attention to the tabloid press in that way, so we're much less easily swayed.
You mean the vilification of Corbyn in the Daily Mail and the Sun, and that played to the strengths of the supporters?
I mean, all you need to say is the establishment hates him. And just anecdotally, I know that when I was out and about in East London, and this might be a little bit of an echo chamber anecdote to tell you, but I was with a friend who was wearing a Corbyn T-shirt. It looked a bit like the Run DMC logo. And we couldn't walk 10 yards down the street without a young person, lots of young black and brown men coming up to him and shaking his hand and being like, yeah, we're definitely going to vote for Corbyn.
Peter, he didn't win it, but it's the Sun what done it.
What did the Sun do?
Well, probably helped to make him such a popular figure when a man like Jeremy Corbyn is demonised by the Mail, by the Sun, by the tabloid
by the way,
press.
you define me as, from The Spectator, I'm a political columnist of the Mail.
Of the Mail.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what you don't mention there is the fact that Corbyn was bitterly hated and detested by the Labour Party, by the PLP, by Blair, by Mandelson. Blair and Mandelson, in Blair's 5 million house in Connaught Square, I'm told there wasn't a single Labour poster. Blair wasn't out there for the party. In fact, he was urging people not to vote Labour in some cases.
Were they wrong, or did they know something about governance that Corbyn has yet to find out?
I mean, Mandelson, likewise, in Regent's Park, that enormous multi-million house. No Labour, I'm told, nothing Labour
Matthew.
there.
But there's another way in which the press and the popular wisdom did Jeremy Corbyn a great favour, and that is that millions of people voted Labour on Thursday because they didn't think there was the remotest chance that Jeremy Corbyn would ever actually be Prime Minister. And he will find that as people begin to take him more seriously, a certain amount of resistance begins to arise because they're starting to think, do we want him as Prime Minister? That isn't what people voted on Thursday.
David Hare.
Well, if you're my age, then you remember two particular elections, and obviously the one that is the closest to this one are what you call vanity elections, where a leader is insecure and for reasons because they want their ego cosseted, they call an election, which Heath obviously did in 1974, and when he did it, he got a resounding no, and Theresa May has done exactly the same thing and got a resounding no. The other one, which is less pleasant to remember, is Neil Kinnock, who fought a far superior campaign to Margaret Thatcher, made huge advances against Margaret Thatcher, was hugely praised, but then in 1992, when he fought John Major, couldn't actually go that last bit. And so where the parallel is will be interesting.
But do you think the whole style of political campaign has now changed? John McDonnell was the one who said, we've reinvented word of mouth. I mean, was that what was appealing, that you could compare the robotics of one campaign with somebody who actually seemed to be enjoying himself?
Well, the Labour Party gave people something to vote for. The Tory party kept on this negative campaigning, really zeroing in their campaign in the final days of the election on like solo people rather than policies, and that was distasteful to watch.
Was that a Linton Crosby error? I mean, this whole idea of no barnacles on the boat, keep saying strong, stable, did he sink her?
Look, I think this is a process question. What was really interesting about this campaign, and Corbyn really rose to the occasion, he had a completely brilliant campaign, it was the return to two-party politics. two parties, completely different ideas. We had a proper socialist party on the left. We had a proper conservative party on the right. We had a massive return of turnout, and this was because of Brexit. Because now in politics now, we have politicians who actually are accountable for the decisions they make. The decisions aren't all made in Brussels and by international corporations anymore. They're made here in Britain. Politicians are legitimate, and Corbyn has benefited from that, and so the Conservatives.
One of the points that you made, Matthew, was that it was the 48% who were starting to look like the left behind or the ignored. Do you think this resets the gauge now on Brexit? Do you think Remainers have taken inspiration?
Oh, there's a great feeling among Remainers. You should have seen George Osborne. You probably did see George Osborne on that night in question, and he speaks for millions of people. Or a feeling that it's not going to happen in the way that we thought it absolutely must happen, which would be a hard Brexit or no deal at all. We don't see how a British government now could get away with no deal or a hard Brexit.
No, one of the misinterpretations, I saw that BBC love-in between Evan Davies and Nick Watts earlier when they were congratulating each other on the fact that we weren't going to have Brexit anymore. It's absolute nonsense.
I didn't hear that at all. I heard Nick Watt informing Evan of stuff he'd heard from ministers
They were
and
agreeing
MPs
with
today.
each other in a BBC way that Brexit was in trouble. Let's not forget that the election's been won by the Conservative Party of Theresa May on a Brexit manifesto. The second party in this is Labour on a Brexit manifesto. Brexit is the winner of this election.
Well, Peter, if Mrs May had swept to victory...
Labour's led Brexit too.
If Mrs May had swept to victory, you Brexit people would have wanted to own that victory. Now, she has tumbled to failure. Are you going to own the failure?
No. Let's not say that she's... She has got a government. She's got a majority in coalition with...
It was a disaster, the election.
And the
it was a
opposition is
disaster for the
Brexit.
reason that Rennie's talking about, I think, was very important. There was a wonderful moment when Lord Lambton, who was a minor Conservative minister, was involved in a scandal with prostitutes in the 70s, and he had to resign. And a wonderful backbench Tory MP said, still there's one consolation, it couldn't happen to a nastier man. And I think that about what's happened to Theresa May. It could not happen to a nastier woman. And I think her behaviour, you know, there are things she said during this campaign, particularly the thing that she said about going naked into the conference chamber, where I just thought, I don't want a Prime Minister who speaks like that. I really don't. And I don't care what party she's in. And Corbyn's natural inclination, I don't think it's even a decision, I think his natural inclination not to join her in the gutter got him a lot of votes. A lot of people liked him for the fact that he didn't fight dirty, and she fought personal, abusive, dirty, nasty, low and mean.
And do you think that is what Theresa May is like, or do you think that's what she...
This is what she's projecting. I mean, she has to go. I was fully expecting her to resign this morning, actually, and I think that she's not going to last the next 5 years. I mean, it's ridiculous that we've just seen a general election, yet she's come out and told the public that she's going to continue to be Prime Minister and we're going to continue to have the same top ministers. Where's the change in that? No wonder people are disenfranchised with politics.
It is an extraordinary position to see a woman who appears to have written a speech several hours, if not weeks ahead, to still be performing on the steps of Downing Street.
Well, she has a very awkward manner. That's not the same as being a nasty person, and I don't think she's a nasty person at all, but she is going to struggle, particularly because she doesn't have an easy and natural style, and she has lost the confidence of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, and I just don't see her carrying on for the full 5 years. If she says that she'll go later this year, I think that will give her a little time.
Do you think she's got the summer and the autumn, or you think this all happens in a flood in September?
I think if she makes it clear that she's here in an interim capacity, they'll give her time and a fair wind. But if she makes it clear that she just wants to carry on indefinitely, I don't think the party will wear it.
It's very interesting.
I mean, today's performance was absolutely dismal. I mean, the three things she did, which were she made a terrible speech in which she appeared not... She said... She didn't even say, I've learned something. She sort of said, I'm going to have to learn something. She then reappointed the 5 people who... You know, one of the reasons she did so badly in the election was not because of her campaign. It was because of her government. We've had a year of very bad government.
So
She
is
hasn't
it
done
about
anything. She
niceness
hasn't done
then? I
anything
mean,
in the
when you
last
say
year.
it's about niceness versus nastiness, doesn't that sort of erode, if you like, the clear blue-red water in their policies?
I think it's about consistency and admitting when you've been wrong. I think that's what it's about, and she refuses to do that.
Peter?
I think that she is the Prime Minister. She has got a constitutional mandate to carry on as Prime Minister.
Is there any love for her in the Conservative Party right now?
I think Matthew's right that there's a lot of unhappiness, and there's no denying that. But on the other hand, I don't see any leadership challenge coming, and I don't think there's a will for it.
Okay.
And I think she's a legitimate leader of this country.
Rennie, when has Jeremy Corbyn ever admitted that he's been wrong about anything?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's what we're really talking about here.
We'll come back for that one. That is it from us tonight. Things were supposed to go quiet this weekend. There's no sign of that. So I'll be back tomorrow from Westminster with a special Newsnight at 6 p.m. Until then, there were a few nervous hours last night for the BBC's election guru, John Curtis, when some had the nerve to challenge the accuracy of his exit poll. We'll leave you now with a reminder of how it played out. Good night.
And what we're saying is 314 for the Conservatives.
Well, let's see some actual results.
This is actually a slightly better result for Labour than we expected from the exit poll.
Well, the reaction from senior Conservatives, and I've talked to a few, is they flatly don't believe it.
The last Newcastle result was also, in fact, better than we expected from the exit polls.
Boy, oh boy, are we going to be hung, drawn and quartered if this is all wrong, which it still might well be.
The exit poll was projecting a 7% swing to Labour. We've got a 2% swing to Labour.
But so far, at least, I think we should all just be holding our nerve.
Or it might be that the exit poll is wrong.
Maybe, in the end, the most accurate exit poll yet.
Hello there. We've got clouds spilling into the UK right now.